Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Lakewood City Council agenda for this Monday, November 20th, 2023. And welcome to those of you joining us by Zoom or otherwise. We appreciate your attendance tonight. So Madam Clerk, if you'd please call the roll.
Councilmember Anderson.
Here.
Councilmember Bell has been excused. Councilmember Boki.
Here.
Councilmember Branstetter.
Here.
Councilmember Lauricella.
Here.
The Mayor Moss.
Here.
And Mayor Whalen.
Present.
You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Now, if you'd please stand and join me in a brief moment of silence in recognition of our servicemen and women serving this great nation at home and abroad, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance to our nation's flag. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America,
to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, thank you. First part of our normal agenda, we got a little sound issue going on, Madam Clerk. First part of our normal agenda includes proclamations and presentations. And tonight we're pleased to have the presentation of the 2024 Stormwater Outreach Calendar, which is a joy every year. We get a chance to enjoy the artwork by all the wonderful students in the community. And tonight I'm going to have Diana Haller from the City of Lakewood Stormwater Compliance Inspection, who will come and present an overview of the 2024 calendar process. And if Ms. Watkins, a principal from Oak Grove Elementary and the Furwood Secondary Schools, and the staff members come on up to the dais, and we'll enjoy this opportunity to celebrate your students.
Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members. So as you know, every year, the City of Lakewood Public Works Department creates a stormwater outreach calendar. And I work with different schools in the Clover Park School District, and this is our 13th year. For the 2024 year calendar, we chose the Oak Grove Elementary and Furwood Secondary Schools. This is a very unique school setting, and therefore the students' names have been left off the calendars, and that is why they are not present at today's council meeting. This year, I'm happy to say I was able to go back into the in-person talk to the students. It's been a while since COVID-19, so I was fortunate to be able to go back into the classrooms and speak with the students. Some of our stormwater messages were pollution prevention and illegal dumping, fish-friendly car washing, picking up your dog waste. And if the students were here, I always get a laugh when I say that. And where does your stormwater really go? And using less fertilizers in your yard, natural yard care. These are some of the biggest concerns we have with stormwater issues. 13 pieces of art were chosen and used throughout the calendar. We had 1,000 calendars printed, and we've given the school 150. And next week, I'll be dropping quite a few off at the Lakewood Council Chamber of Commerce, several different businesses within the city of Lakewood that practice good stormwater stewardship, and they can give those out for free to their clients. In addition to meeting one of our NPDES permit requirements, this also meets our second unique element of our most recent interagency agreement between the state of Washington, Department of Ecology, Pollution Prevention Assistance Program, and the city of Lakewood. Thank you.
Thank you. Like to say a few words about the process or the fun you had?
Our students thoroughly enjoyed this opportunity. As you can see, we weren't able to put names on, but they know, and they are very proud of this opportunity. So we want to thank you for selecting our school and for giving us this opportunity. So thank you.
Well, and on behalf of the city, we have a recognition certificate for each one of the students that you're welcome to provide, along with a copy of the calendar so they can see their beautiful artwork in print.
So thank you.
We'll take a picture. Come on up. We'll get a
Okay.
picture of all you guys up here around the dais there, and council members down. Yeah. Normally we pass them out individually, but you can all hold one. How's that?
Of our students.
Yeah. Come on up here. We'll gather around, take a picture for you guys. How are you? Thank you for doing that. Yeah, good job. Were they great? Thank you. Okay, next on the agenda for tonight is our public comment section of tonight's agenda. Public comments are accepted by mail, email, or by live, virtual, or in-person comment. Comments may be submitted in advance by mail or email to our city clerk, Ms. Schumacher, at 6000 Main Street Southwest in Lakewood, or to her email address at bschumacher@cityoflakewood.us. Any comments received up to an hour before the meeting have been provided to us electronically, and I will have the clerk read the names of those who have submitted comments in advance for our record.
Mayor Whalen, we received no comments in advance of this evening's meeting.
Thank you. There will be a public hearing later this evening on the agenda. So if you plan to provide testimony on the 2023-24 mid-biennial budget ordinance, please wait to do so under that portion of tonight's agenda. So members who are here and those who have signed in virtually may comment on items pertaining to any matter related to city business under this public comment period. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes per person. And when you get to the podium, if you signed up or if you were present online and you use the raise the hand feature, just please state your name and residence of record, and then you'll proceed with the 3 minutes for public comment. And we have a clock that you're able to see at the dais there as it counts down your time. If you're going to provide virtual public comments, you'll have to join the Zoom meeting as an attendee. I believe the clerk put up the telephone number to dial into, as well as a meeting ID number. If you don't have it, it's 868-7263-2373. And please use the raise the hand feature. I know we had a little glitch last week where someone believed they had their hand raised, but during the period, if I call on you or you're waiting to be called on, please keep your hand raised so we can both see you, myself and the city clerk, to ensure that everyone gets a chance who wants to speak. So outside of public comments here, as I indicated, attendees on Zoom can do that by using this virtual raise a hand feature. I trade off back and forth between those who are on Zoom. I call them either first or second, depending on what I did in the prior week. So this week, I'm going to call those who are on Zoom first or on the phone, who have indicated with the raise a hand feature that they'd like to speak tonight. And then we'll turn to those who've signed in on the actual sign-in sheet. Very good. First, I see some hands raised. I'm going to go from the bottom down this time. Mr. Dunlop.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is James Dunlop and I am a Lakewood resident. I wanted to talk about the library, and so now it seems that the site at the Tensler building, the plan is to build apartments there. I believe the justification for that would be that I suppose it's close to the sort of shopping area in Lakewood Town Centre. That's sort of good for business. Of course, you know, we don't know how long retail, you know, as a personal rather than online experience is going to last for. I mean, particularly with sort of high rates of shoplifting and so forth. I would not be surprised if in 10 years, 20 years, I don't know, shopping even for groceries may be an entirely online experience. So I'm not quite sure if that is necessarily a particularly good idea. But more importantly, I think that there is a sense in which everyone has been deceived including, I think, the city council. You know, you went through this laborious process of having a joint committee, having public participation involving Lakewood and the Pierce County, and the city council and the Pierce County library system went through this. But it seems that really you planned this all along. I don't mean you'd planned this all along, but someone had planned this all along. And this does seem to be a sort of act of deception, and it's kind of quite sort of symbolic that regardless of what the school boards say, school standards are not good. Latest results are sort of inconclusive, but you know, the libraries was kind of right close to Clover Park High School. Now that's not going to be a library anymore. So that sort of symbolic connection has gone. And I mean, I think that there is a sense of betrayal in Lakewood. And you know, as I have said on numerous occasions to you, I think you should be considering de-annexation, not least because of the insult from the Pierce County library system, which has treated Lakewood very badly. And I do understand that many sort of members of the city council are connected with municipal government, but I think it's time to sort of be independent and to think about what is right for Lakewood and what is right for the future of Lakewood. And I really would urge you to reconsider de-annexation again and to have it as a more public process so that people of Lakewood can get involved with that process and not just be told, oh, it's too expensive. So that's really all I wanted to say. So please, can you reconsider de-annexation? Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Christina Minetti.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Christina Minetti, Lakewood. I was also extremely disturbed to find in the agenda materials for the study session of Monday, October 23rd, 2023, the former Tensor site included in the 3 development program scenarios, conservative, moderate, and aggressive. All of these have a proposed 150-unit apartment complex on the former Tensor site. And as I've de Leon, and this is to it. People had their suspicions, and one person even claimed to have insider's knowledge that the whole plan behind suddenly closing our beloved library had nothing to do with the leaking roof. That came out of the blue. Some developer was actually sharpening his teeth, people thought, facilitated by the city of Lakewood and the Pierce County Library District to stuff the parcel full of apartments. Best of all, of course, affordable housing, which always sounds good for PR. The people of Lakewood were deceived. They were deceived by the Pierce County Library System, who insisted there were no such plans and that they would listen to the so-called Library Citizens Advisory Board's recommendation. The city also insisted that they played no role in determining the fate of the former Tensor site because, of course, it wasn't even theirs after all. We went through the sham of the consultant-run Citizens Advisory Board to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars. The recommendation was, if I remember correctly, to rebuild our library on the same site. So how is it that all of a sudden, a huge number of people in Lakewood wanted to save the building, actually. 1,000 of them, for example, signed the petition, approximately 1,000, signed the petition to save the historical Tensor building, which is really crucial element in Lakewood. So how is it all of a sudden, when no one at the city or PCLS was planning to stuff the parcel with 150 apartments, now it's a core element in all 3 of the development plans? How is it that one of the main issues with putting the new library there was a lack of parking space? And now there will not only be space for 150 apartments, but also all the parking spaces to go with them. This lays bare the deception that drives the city and the library system's functioning. A huge apartment building that would ruin my parents' neighborhood. Please bring back our library and reject developers' pressure to put a huge apartment building there. It is one of our nicest places, and we should treasure it. I beg you, please reconsider. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Mr. Haugen.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yes.
Dennis Haugen from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Formerly of Lakewood, familiar with both cities. And I think there's a little touchiness about somebody from Sioux Falls talking about Lakewood business, but I'm calling it for, I'm talking to you for your benefit. We have about 25 states, half the states are totally against illegal entry into the country. And now we've learned what it brings. And the school systems, you know, if you have a school system and of thousands of students and half the people haven't learned reading, writing, and arithmetic, they're going to have an awful hard time in life. They're going to be the ones that are going to be working for the cartel. And, you know, the cartel hires American citizens to haul people across the country, haul drugs into the country. It's a big, big, huge money-making business. And your school system has to be pressed into producing results. And propaganda, it's very interesting that George Soros just gave some money to some outfit in Austin, a university in Austin, Texas, in which they very plainly state that it's not the job of the news media. In fact, for a news media school, it's not their job to tell the truth. It's their job, basically, to put a narrative on the news. And that can be all kinds of emotional crap. And I think we all got a shock this week. Great universities with high prestige out there. How did all these kids learn to be so angry at Jews? Well, just a few days later, here comes 100 professors, and they're ticked off because somebody defended the Jews. So we see what's going on in our schools, and we also understand a little bit about what might be going on with the news media. Propaganda, learn to recognize it. And don't let these people think that you're a fool. They come up with something like math is racist. Take exception to it so they don't think you're stupid, you know? And that's where it's at. We're here to help you if you want to get out of the mess. Thank you.
That's the last individual I see with a hand raised virtually, unless the clerk sees other hands raised that I am missing. Anything else on the virtual hand raising here for public comment?
Mayor, there are no other virtual hands raised at this time.
Okay, very good. Well, I'll go to those who have signed in on the public comment sheet. Dan Durr is the first, and then if you haven't signed in, feel free, you're eligible to go up to the dais. If you're here, just feel free to queue up and, as indicated, state your name and residence for the record.
Thank you. I'm Dan Durr on Nyanza Road Southwest here in Lakewood. I was part of a number of people that tried to get in last week, unfortunately, unsuccessfully, but I thought I'd take the opportunity tonight to speak to City Council about a couple of concerns I have regarding, I believe accurately, ordinance number 793 and 794. And I think in those ordinances groups in daycare, ADUs, and short-term rentals. Is that correct? So those are the issues I'd like to talk about. I've lived in a world of zoning regulations my entire career in commercial real estate. So zoning is something that sometimes I'm in favor of the way things are zoned, and sometimes I'm not. But the fact remains, any given piece of property that I'm involved in is zoned. And so I would like to appeal to City Council tonight. Number one, I don't believe you've heard from everyone that would like to speak based on the number of people that were speaking in the background last week. So I'd like to suggest that maybe you give a little bit more time before you take your vote. So that's number one. Number two, I believe that there's a some confusion amongst those discussing this of the term ADU and short-term rental. It seems like it's being used synonymously in some conversations. So what I'd like to suggest is that they are two very different things. I may be in favor of ADUs, but very much against short-term rentals, for example. So I'd like to make sure that we delineate those two titles, if you will, before blanketing, making a decision that would affect the approval of one or the other. Lastly, I'd like to speak to daycare being allowed in any zone. As I reviewed the different residential zones, for example, and there were others, but different residential zones, daycare would be allowed in any zone. And although I'm in favor of daycare, I'm in favor of daycare operating in not just anywhere. So for example, if you had a gated community, for example, and a daycare was in that gated community, you suddenly have dozens of people coming through that gate every day with the code, in essence, disturbing that neighborhood or disturbing a private road, et cetera. So I'd like council to look into this a little bit deeper, maybe segregate these uses that we're talking about and see where ADU is appropriate, but short-term rental isn't. That's all I have for you tonight.
Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
coming. Again, that was the last individual who signed in physically, but if you would like to address council in the public comment period, please queue up, state your name and residence for the record, and proceed.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ibrahim Jalili. I'm here to discuss about the open house that it was on November 15. I was not in town to attend it. I was unable to attend it. One of the things that it was raised, and I want to question the council and in particular the city manager, Mr. Goldfeld, is that they talk about inclusivity. I don't know what that means because I can't understand it. I would appreciate if you would, next time you would discuss that. Also, there was a property that it was on the west side of the Edgewater Drive, southwest on 9012. It sold in mid-October last month for $1,150,000. I am wonder why the city did not acquire that instead of condemning our home. Also, the very same property, we want to know why this city issued a permit to update it while the structure was supposedly within city right away. And it decided first to make some claim on our property. And while none of our structure is within so-called city right away, which we believe it is a fraud to begin with, to condemn our home because we did not give in our right, because we were not deceived by those who were involved, because we stood up for our rights, because we paid for our home. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience wishes to address council in the public comment period? Seeing none, I'll declare the public comment period closed. We'll now turn to the the consent agenda. Madam Clerk.
A, approval of the minutes of the city council study session of October 23rd, 2023. B, approval of the minutes of the city council special meeting of October 30th, 2023. C, approval of the minutes of the city council meeting of November 6th, 2023. D, motion number 2023-105, approving the 2024 human service funding recommendations. E, motion number 2023-106, approving the 2024 lodging tax funding recommendations. F, motion number 2023-107, authorizing the award of a construction contract to Sound Pacific Construction LLC in the amount of $5,132,292.91 for the construction of the Hipkins Road Improvement Project. G, items filed in the office of the city clerk. 1, Lakewood's Promise Advisory Board meeting minutes of August 4th, 2023. 2, Planning Commission meeting minutes of October 4th, 2023. And 3, Lakewood's Promise Advisory Board meeting minutes of October 5th, 2023.
Thank you very much. Is there any council member that wishes to remove any item from the consent agenda for consideration at this time? Seeing none, do I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda as presented? It's been moved by Deputy Mayor Moss, seconded by Councilmember Laura Sella, that we adopt the consent agenda as presented. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Boki. The consent agenda has been adopted. We now turn to the regular agenda, public hearings and appeals. This is the date set for the public hearing on the 2023-2024 mid-biennial budget ordinance. For this, we'll first call on our Deputy City Manager, Todd Kraus.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. The proposed mid-biennium budget adjustment was reviewed at the November 13th study session. A public hearing as required by state law occurred at the last is this evening. Sorry, I got my dates messed up. And then adoption is scheduled for December 4th. The proposed budget adjustment makes the following types of modifications to the current biennium. It revises the estimated beginning fund balance to reflect the final 2022 ending fund balance, makes adjustments to incorporate items previously approved by the City Council, appropriates projects funded by grants and contributions, some continuations of capital projects, and new allocations as necessary. The proposed budget adjustment does not include the potential financial impacts to the 2024 AFSCME contract, which expires at the end of this year. The proposed budget adjustment maintains the general fund ending fund balance reserves and the Economic Development Opportunity Fund. At the end of 2023, if the City Council were to approve this budget adjustment, the total general fund ending fund balance would be $11,462,171. And in 2024, it is reduced to $7,643,188. And that equates to our ending fund balance reserves. The total budget adjustment in 2023 and 2024 revenue adjustments total $10,616,395 and expenditures total $11,986,830. A summary of the budget adjustment, as well as a very detailed explanation of these adjustments, is included in the packet, and it has been available online since prior to the November 13th study session. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. And we did review this at some length during the study session. But are there any questions of council to Ms. Kraus? Well, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Good work and very thorough. This is the date set for this public hearing. Public testimony on the public hearing is accepted by mail, email, or live virtual or in-person comment. Testimony may be submitted in advance by mail or email to the city clerk at 6000 Main Street Southwest here in Lakewood, or to B. Schumacher at cityoflakewood.us. Comments received up to an hour before the meeting on this particular topic for the public hearing have been provided to the City Council electronically, or if they have, they will be provided to the City Council electronically. Madam Clerk, have we received any written testimony in advance by email?
Mayor Whalen, we did not receive any testimony in advance of this evening's meeting.
Very good. And I've not received a sign-in sheet for the public hearing. I don't know if you've received any.
Mayor, there is no one signed in at this time.
Okay, but I will certainly call the audience to see if they have testimony. Public testimony is limited to 3 minutes per person. So again, if you'd like to testify virtually, you certainly may by joining the Zoom meeting as an attendee by dialing the phone number 253-215-8782, entering the meeting ID number of 868-7263-2373, and certainly use the raise the hand feature to be called upon. If you're here physically in the audience, you certainly can step up to the podium to address the council or to provide testimony, I should say, during this public hearing on the 2023-2024 mid-biennial budget ordinance. So I'll first call on those who may be appearing via Zoom or on the phone if they'd like to provide testimony during this public hearing. Madam Clerk, do we have any hands raised?
Mayor, there are no virtual hands raised at this time.
Anybody on the phone that we need to double check? Okay. And as I indicated, I don't have any comments on the public hearing sign-in sheet, but if you'd like to address or provide testimony during this public hearing on the 2023-2024 mid-biennial budget ordinance, now is the time. So seeing none in the audience, going once, going twice, I'll declare the public hearing closed. We now turn to ordinances. Madam Clerk.
Ordinance number 792, amending Lakewood Municipal Code Title 3, Revenue and Finance, Property Tax Exemptions for Multifamily Housing, Chapter 3.64.
Thank you very much. And for this, I'd like to call on our Economic Development Manager, Ms. Newton, to give us a bit of an overview on this topic before we call the question.
Evening, Mayor Whalen, Deputy Mayor Moss, and members of council. This evening, we are reviewing ordinance number 792, beginning on page 105 of your packet. The recommendations for this ordinance are located on page 120 of your packet. All of the items are the same as what we reviewed at the study session and public hearing. Except for one item, and I'd like to call your attention to number 10. And after review of public testimony and further review of by staff, page 116 shows an expanded potential boundary for the Central Business District, RTA. So we are recommending expanding the CBD residential target area to include proposed expansion area identified in pink on the map included in the draft ordinance of 792. Other than that, all of the other recommendations are the same as was presented. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. Just a question. Can you give us a sense of the rationale behind the identity of the proposed expansion area? Is there some method to the madness on the delineated boundary there?
Thank you, Mayor Whalen. Yes, after review, we have noted that Bravely Lake Drive, we know of one project that is in the works that could take advantage of the multifamily tax exemption. And also that corridor along Bravely Lake Drive has a potential for other residential development. And so therefore a staff determined that that was the most likely area that we would like to expand to.
Mr. Brandstetter.
I guess that I'm a little confused as to why a future proposed RTA is included in this ordinance. This ordinance doesn't establish or change any RTAs. This ordinance wouldn't place the proposed area in an RTA. I mean, there's a separate process for doing that. So, and that process would have to work its way through and ultimately be approved by the council to change the boundaries of an RTA or establish a new one. So, including it in this ordinance as a proposed thing seems to send the message that may not be correct, that the RTA will in fact in the future be adjusted to include this proposed area. And so I am concerned that including it in this ordinance as a proposed area has no effect other than to create uncertainty out there until the process is actually worked through. There's a hearing that there's action by the council to change the central business district RTA. So I'm having trouble understanding the logic of including it in this ordinance today.
Our response is the ordinance 792 recommends the expansion of the CBD RTA as outlined in section of the proposed ordinance that comes before the map, which as follows: the proposed boundaries of the residential target areas include the boundaries of the geographic areas listed below and as indicated in the comprehensive plan, which are incorporated herein by reference on file of the city clerk's office.
Yeah, I am saying that for the ordinance to say that it is recommended that the RTA be expanded to include the proposed areas is shortcutting the process by having the council vote to say we recommend doing that before going through all of the procedures that are required, such as notifying the public, having a public hearing and some other outreach regarding establishing a boundary for an RTA. It's essentially putting words in our mouth, okay, that is where that essentially can be interpreted as committing us in the future to saying yes to a future action to amend the RTA. And so it would be, you know, to put in the municipal code that it is recommended that something happen is not necessarily the way the municipal code should work, because there's no certainty to that, okay, other than it's getting those of us on the council to be faced with, well, you said back when you did this ordinance that you recommend this, so trying to hold us to voting that way on a future action. And, you know, and I would much prefer that we not do that. We don't have a vehicle to do that under this ordinance, because it would, and not doing it would not change the other elements of the ordinance that we do want to change and actually make part of the code to be able to go and do that. And Mr. Mayor, I think that I will once we have the ordinance on the docket, I would be looking to move to remove the references to the proposed expansion of the RTA, even though I don't have a particular reason why in the future I wouldn't be appropriate to it, but only because I just don't think they're appropriate in this ordinance.
Thank you very much. Let me open it up for other questions. Mr. Anderson had a question?
I have some similar concerns. First of all, has anyone outside the city asked for this change or been privy to discussions regarding this proposed change, expansion?
We did have some public, Councilmember Anderson, we did have some public comment during the public hearing that requested expansion to that area. But outside of that, it's been staff recommending potential expansion due to where we think that residential capacity could be added.
If you look at the map, and I've now reduced it to look at a different map.
Just page
Well,
116.
Other areas are boxed. This is a lineal strip and with a T on it. And it does not appear that in some cases that the depth would necessarily allow for a significant multifamily development. It does also not appear that it matches, it's an exact match with our zoning. So I think there are areas there that aren't multifamily. And there are areas there that are multifamily that are contiguous that aren't included. So it appears that in the haste to bring this forward, that they don't align. And I think we need to look very seriously at that. And that's what the process Mr. Branstetter is talking about is for. When you look at the comprehensive plan and you develop an area for multifamily, that's getting the horse before the cart. I think we're at that backwards here.
I had two questions so as I look at the proposed ordinance on page 115 of the packet, we see paragraph under 3.64.030 sub 4, and it seems to speak to the concerns raised by council members Branstetter and Anderson. It reads, when designating a residential target area, the city council shall give notice of a hearing to be held on the matter, and that notice shall be published not less than 15 days, nor more than 30 days before the date of the hearing. It's published on the city's website, states the date, time, and place, blah, blah, blah. So, and then it jumps down to subpart C, which is the recommended expansion of the RTA into the pink area on the map on page 116. So I guess the question is, did we have any such sort of hearing before the planning commission at all on the expansion? I don't think we have yet, right?
We did not. We had a public hearing before the planning commission.
But not about
Did
this
not
particular proposed
specifically.
expansion. Okay,
Correct, Mayor. Thank you.
got it. But this in the future, if this ordinance as drafted were to pass, we would have to actually give notice of the hearing and go through the process before we expanded the RTA or changed it in any way, correct?
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. On the proposed expansion of the RTA area, again, I'm not particularly against it. But looking at it, yeah, I see Mr. Bokeh has his hand raised, but I'll finish my question first before I call on him. But looking at the particular area, there are some large parcels and some smaller parcels. Is the thought by staff that those are more aligned to multifamily in those particular parcels?
Yes, both Mr. Buer and myself had reviewed the areas and believe those would be adequate for multifamily development.
Which is something we could certainly do if council elected to have a little bit more process. Mr. Bokeh, your hand is raised there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not to, I don't want to pile on this point, but I think technically, a change like this in a map should manifest itself in the title of the ordinance. And nothing in the title of the ordinance indicates that there's a map change at all. So I would think just from a public notification standpoint, the map change just it isn't even allowable in this case right now. It should not even consider it.
Okay, any other questions? Deputy Mayor, Mr. Morrison? Okay, let me see here. So we need to have a motion to put 792 on the table, and then if there are thoughts about amending it, there's no motion on the table yet. Yeah, there's no motion on the table yet. So do we have a motion to adopt ordinance 792 at this time after no further questions? I understand it to Ms. Newton.
Motion to add that.
Motion to adopt ordinance 792. Do I have a second?
Second.
Been moved by Councilmember Laura Sella, seconded by Councilmember Branstetter that we adopt ordinance number 792. Further discussion, Mr. Branstetter.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I would move to amend ordinance 792 to delete any references or depiction to a proposed change to a residential target area for the central business district.
Second the amendment.
It's been moved by Councilmember Branstetter, seconded by Councilmember Anderson, that ordinance 792 be amended to remove references to any proposed or expanded RTA in the ordinance or in the proposed Exhibit A. And do I need to be more specific than that? I think that gets the intent. Mr. Caulfield, did you have a question or? Okay, very good. Any further discussion on that amendment? Did you want to speak to it, Mr. Branstetter? You've kind of said your piece, but feel free.
I would only reiterate that I'm not opposed to a consideration of changing the RTA, but not as a part of this ordinance and including it in something that would not be a final action in any event.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the amendment to ordinance 792 as articulated, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? The amendment has been adopted. Now we turn to ordinance 792 as amended. Mr. Anderson.
I move to amend the proposed ordinance by deleting any reference to a 20-year exemption.
It's been moved by Councilmember Anderson to delete references to the 20-year multifamily tax exemption from the proposed ordinance 792. Do we have a second on this?
I'll second that.
It's been seconded by Councilmember Laura Sella. Mr. Anderson, do you want to speak to the proposed amendment?
Yeah, I believe this would tie the city's hands too far in the future. Part of the beauty of this system is that you can provide an incentive that has a foreseeable conclusion. The property comes back on the rolls. It gives an incentive that can be calculated by a developer. No idea what interest rates and other property taxes are going to be 20 years from now. I have a problem with the 12-year exemption. But I don't think we should expand it another 8 years and take these properties offline for tax purposes for that long.
Very good. Any other comments? Mr. Haugen, we can't call on you. There's no public hearing here, but thank you for your interest. Any other council members with comments or items of discussion? I have a question of Ms. Newton based upon Mr. Anderson's proposed amendment. Looking at page 110 of the packet, as I understand the 20-year exemption, it's of limited project eligibility. The applications are only accepted for a period through December 30, 2031. Applications have to be located in the Lakeland Station District and the Springbrook residential target areas only. And can you explain the rationale for that? I assume it was to spur even further development in areas that we want to see more housing.
Yes, Mayor, the reason why the state added the 20-year is to encourage more affordable housing and also home ownership. So this particular program would require 25% home ownership within the project. And so thereby increasing that capacity for lower income folks to have ownership. And the 20 years was also the intent for the legislature was to increase affordability longer term. And the reason why we chose those areas and did not add it to the central business district is because we are hoping to move forward with a tax increment financing project within that increment area and adding more time to the multifamily tax exemption would then take away from the future increases in taxes that the city would receive due to private sector development.
And then with regard to the 25% of the units must be built by or sold to a qualified nonprofit or local government that will assure permanent affordable home ownership to those households. So I don't recall receiving much information from Habitat for Humanity, but is this a proposal that they are aligned with? Do they see that this is an incentive that would help them create more investment in those two areas?
Mayor, I have not personally spoken to Habitat with regard to that. However, what it allows a nonprofit to do is own a project, and then they can then sell 25, they would have to sell 25% of that to an individual or families that are within that income bracket. And it would have to maintain that level throughout the 20 years. However, to answer your question, I have not spoken to Habitat. with
Are other
regard to this.
jurisdictions doing similar incentives in targeted areas?
Mayor Whalen, there are other jurisdictions that are adding this 20-year option, correct?
Okay. Mr. Brandstetter.
Well, you know, the amendment is really setting the stage that we would have 8 and 12-year exemptions, which each with their own ability. That I'm not quite sure I understand the discussion around Habitat, which as a nonprofit and their lands become non-taxed anyway. That they're the multifamily tax exemption is applicable. And I'm also going to support the amendment because I agree with doing 20 years at a is a big bite. And the 8 and 12-year exemption projects would still have the ability to apply for an extension to their 8 or 12 years, where they would be able to apply for a subsequent 12-year extension. But you would do that at a time of when the project has some history, that we've had a period of time of where we understand of where the city is going, with being able to go and do that without doing 20 years up front. But, you know, essentially, as I understand the amendment, it would eliminate section G. But section H would still be there, that would allow a viable 8-year project at the end of 8 years, if they went through the process, to apply for an extension beyond their 8 years, to be able to go and do that. And so I'm going to vote for the amendment, okay, with the understanding that section H would remain.
Let me clarify with Mr. Anderson. The intent of your amendment, as I understand it, is to remove effectively section G, which speaks to the 20-year exemption project eligibility.
I believe there's another reference in there too, but that's the operative one.
Any other,
I also have,
Mr. Anderson?
with respect to section 6, that requires or refers to at least 25% of the units must be built or sold to qualified nonprofit or local government. If a nonprofit owns it, they're used for the nonprofit purpose. It's generally tax exempt. If a government owns it, it's tax exempt. So 25% of the exemption for the entire period of time is removed. So you've got 75% exemption for 20 years. So you're taking some of it away. You'd probably be better off from a purely mathematical standpoint. I haven't done the equation, but might be better off taking a 12-year exemption where you get 100% than extending it out into the unknown for 75% of it. And it's going to be hard. It's going to make it much more difficult to find people who can meet that criteria to purchase those units. So you're going to have an entirely an additional government program like a CDBG loan program or something that's heavily subsidized by the federal government to come up with somebody's financing to be in that category. So the incremental costs between government regulation and the financing are a bad deal for the taxpayer underlying this whole thing anyway. I mean, with respect to that 25% provision going out 20 years. The juice isn't worth the squeeze.
Very good. Any other comments? Items of discussion? If not, all those in favor of the amendment that effectively deletes section G from ordinance 792 and any other references allowing a 20-year property tax exemption, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? The amendment passes. So we now turn to ordinance 792 as amended twice. So hopefully staff has a good feel for the amendments. Any further discussion on ordinance 792 as amended? If not, all those in favor of adoption of ordinance 792 as amended, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? The ordinance has been adopted. We now move to ordinance 793, adopting amendments to Title 18A related to zoning and development regulations. And for this, we'll have our long-range and strategic planning manager, Ms. Spear, give us an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. So this document begins on page 121 of your packet. And actually, there is a reference to both ordinance 793 and 794 related to this issue. And the option this evening for city council is to adopt one of those ordinance or the other. The only difference between the two is that in ordinance 793, the recommendation from the Community and Economic Development Department to prohibit the use of accessory dwelling units as short-term rentals is included, whereas ordinance 794 would reflect the Planning Commission's split recommendation that allows short-term rentals in accessory dwelling units. So the greater issue here is the annual package of development regulations. There's a total of 12. And up to this point, the real focus of conversation, both at the Planning Commission and the Council, has been Amendment 12 regarding this issue. But those are the only two differences between, or the only difference, excuse me, between the two ordinances relates to whether or not short-term rentals would be allowed within accessory dwelling units. As you see on page 122 and 123, the city was able to gather some information regarding the number of short-term rentals in Lakewood as of now. As of November 6th, I believe, of 2023, there was 136 unique units, 171 listings, meaning that some of the units are listed on multiple short-term rental websites. There has been a median nightly rate identified of $96 per night. And in terms of growth rate, there's been an increase from 71 units in April of 2021 to 136 in November of 23. There is a recommendation included in the ordinance that talks about, excuse me, not this ordinance, in the mid-biennial budget, excuse me, that talks about using funds from the rental housing safety program to set up and administer tracking short-term rentals. And the idea here also that is presented to you from the department is that should the council wish to move ahead with allowing short-term rentals in the city as proposed under this amendment, whether or not they're in accessory dwelling units, that there also be an increase in business license fees for these units. And this industry standard is 2 to 3 nights worth. So a recommendation would be $250. And what that would do is significantly increase business license revenue to help cover, again, the cost of a tracking software that could be purchased. So with that, I'm happy to answer any of the questions.
Okay, first I've got a question that might help broaden the discussion. On page 122, you reference the identified short-term rentals from 71 to 136 in Lakewood. So the question to clarify, to avoid confusion, equating ADUs with short-term rentals is that number represents single-family homes or ADUs as short-term rentals, correct? Not just ADUs?
If I misspoke, I apologize. This is a map of all short-term rentals of any kind
Of any
within the
kind.
site and within the city.
Yep.
So if
No.
you look at page 123 at the top, you'll see those two graphics. What that is showing is the type of unit. So some of them, 78% of them are the entire home, 22 are a part of a home. And then on the second graphic, you'll see about 70% of them are single-family homes and about a third are multifamily homes. But this is all short-term rentals, not just what would be within an existing accessory dwelling unit.
Right, and the ordinance, whether 793 or 794, would not impact the single-family home unit type as a short-term rental whatsoever, correct?
What both of these have in exact verbatim language is the new proposed regulations for any short-term rental, regardless of the type.
Okay. That's
The only
important to know.
difference is between whether or not you want to allow short-term rentals in accessory dwelling units or not. And otherwise, it would be short-term rentals in any other type of housing unit that could be constructed as of now. And the reason there is a concern from the city department that was brought to the Planning Commission and then to council really focuses on parking and right-of-way widths for on-street parking, because we know that there is a number of streets within the areas where new state laws requiring up to 4 accessory dwelling units be allowed per lot, where the city is not allowed to require off-street parking nor street improvements.
If they're within the half mile of the major
Correct.
transit area, right?
Correct. And there is a limit on the number of parking units you can require across the city for these types of units. So that is why the city department has been saying maybe not allow short-term rentals in accessory dwelling units, given this door that's been opened by the state legislature to allow a significant number more.
Got it. But we're not precluding short-term rentals in single-family homes
Not
by
at
this
all.
ordinance.
Not at all. Both
Okay.
of them are simply
Yep.
adding new regulation.
Got it. Okay, just want to clarify. Mr. Anderson.
Has there been any exploration of solving the problem you just mentioned with respect to parking by focusing on that problem and saying, in order to be licensed as a short-term rental, you must provide off-street parking? Because
That is-
quasi-business, and I don't know of any state prohibition against that type of requirement.
2 weeks from tonight, the council is actually going to be talking about parking as an additional topic for part of the 24 comprehensive plan amendment process, and looking at the city's existing policies and pursual of grants for its road design, which right now does not include an assumption for on-street parking. Your question, Mr. Anderson, about whether the city can say, if you are a short-term rental, you have to do this type of parking on site, or for that matter, on the street, would be limited by the specific statutory language saying accessory dwelling units, you cannot require parking for X, Y, or Z.
It says you can't require parking for a short-term rental. If you don't distinguish between an ADU and a house and a hotel, if you're renting space on a short-term basis the city should be able, under the state statute, to provide that you must provide parking for your customer.
I'm not
It's
sure if we're
not saying that your ADU has to have it. It's saying in order to rent a room, a detached structure, anything on a short-term basis, you have to provide parking for your customers.
I don't know if we're saying the same thing or not, but.
I don't think
if
we are.
Okay, if I could respond,
And so you didn't explore it, is what you're telling me,
if I could respond, please.
that was my question, was if a restriction on parking with respect to the licensing of an ADU or a house or anywhere else had been explored. And I take it your answer is no.
Councilmember Anderson, the answer I can give you right now is that there is no state statute I'm aware of that says for an accessory dwelling unit or any other housing type, if it was only just a short-term rental, you cannot require a certain amount of parking. What I am saying to you is that under House Bill 1337 or whatever the ultimate version of it was adopted, that is saying that if it is an accessory dwelling unit in a particular area of your city, no matter how it's used, if it's an accessory dwelling unit, that cannot have parking required as part of its development requirements.
Correct. And then when you develop it, you have a finished unit and you can choose whether or not to have a parking space. And then when you come to the city and say, I want a license for my ADU to have a short-term rental, say, do you have a parking space? Could be in their driveway, in their house. But they would have to have a parking space to license the short-term rental, not to build the unit. So you're not violating the statute. It's just kind of unimaginative.
So you were saying that we potentially could be more restrictive than state law in those areas of transit-oriented development within a half mile, whatever the rule is, right? That would be a way of
it's-
restricting.
Yeah, you address the problem. Problem is you have these transitory users coming and going, clogging up the streets. You balance the property rights of the owner to use their property for the highest and best use against the real problem, which is clogging up the streets with on-street parking. And it's a workaround with respect to the legislature saying, okay, that ADU can be licensed and the other one can't. But you could say that the houses there, they probably have a driveway or they have a garage. They could cede that to the.
You could fix the parking issue potentially.
Yeah.
As part of the licensing requirement. Questions, Mr. Bokeh, did you have your hand raised there? On this, Mr. Brandstetter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Spear, I'm trying to really understand what the process is. You know, during public comment, we heard the concern that ADU and accessory and STRs are, the term is being used interchangeable in that a building that's one could be the other, and I'm not necessarily sure that that's the case. But in this case, how is an ADU created? In other words, it's something that goes through a building permitting process, and someone is seeking a permit to build an ADU specifically.
Yes, Mr. Brandstetter, what we're talking about, and I apologize that it is so interrelated, but the ordinance in front of you tonight includes a number of changes for regulation of short-term rentals. Where the city department has been recommending prohibition is strictly for short-term rentals within accessory dwelling units. This does not in any way limit accessory dwelling units. It actually expands where they can be allowed. But the thought process for the department was, given you go through all of this process to get approval as an accessory dwelling unit, based on state law that's going to go into effect June 30th of 2025, there is a requirement that the city not, it's not allowed to say on-street improvements or on-street parking for these units.
Okay.
And so therefore ADUs and STRs are talking about, we're talking about it in the same sentence, but they are two different
Okay,
things.
but something begins life as an ADU.
Correct.
So what's the process to convert an ADU to an STR?
There would need to be a application for a state license. There would need to be approval by the city for a short-term rental permit. And what's suggested in the regulations that you have in front of you this evening is that under those short-term rentals regulations, it's an administrative process whereby the review is done to make sure that it's a health and safety issue. It's an inspection. There's a recommendation that at some point these be incorporated into short-term rentals, be incorporated into the rental housing safety program to make sure that they are regularly inspected by the city to, again, for health and safety. But in terms of parking improvements or road improvements, as of right now, the rules on the books would stay the same for any accessory dwelling unit, whether or not it's a short-term rental or not. Come 2025, that rule is going to change. And accessory dwelling units and their impact to parking and transportation will be handled differently by the city per state law.
If
Okay,
they're
so-
within that
so-
half mile.
So
Citywide.
let me just understand. So right now, under either of these two ordinances, if there's an ADU under one, a property owner can go through the process to convert the ADU to an STR, and that business license could in fact address some of the concerns or not, or do we need a comprehensive plan update regarding parking before that would become possible?
I think I'm understanding your question. Apologies if I don't. The way the ordinance, either 793 or 794 read right now, you would have the ability to get permitting for and construct an accessory dwelling unit without a lot of change as of right now under city code. What's changing here is the regulations that relate specifically to short-term rentals, and it's short-term rentals in any type of housing unit. It's not specifically talking about a short-term rental within an ADU. The only difference between these two ordinances is that 793 would prohibit ADUs to be used as an STR, whereas 794 would allow them to be short-term rentals.
But to become an STR of any sort requires going through a licensing process that could well require some conditional use or something that's conditional.
It is, yes, it is within the code to say you have to follow these operating and development conditions. You have to follow these development permit requirements. And so the city goes through that process, whether or not it's a short-term rental.
So, so I guess is the concern is there's a process and that people could go about, if they have an ADU, either they build a new one and they have it and they want to convert it, or they do that. Is there a process for someone to want to, from the get-go, build an STR when they go through the permitting rather than building an ADU first?
Yes, that's what this is establishing. Yes. It's already in the code for some zones. This is saying you would now be able to do that in more zones. Yes.
So the development process to establish from scratch an STR, even if it's going to look like an ADU, but it's going to be an STR from the beginning, would then not be subject to the state rules that you're talking about regarding things we can't approve. So what we're concerned about is people developing something as an ADU to avoid certain development actions and then converting it to an STR officially or surreptitiously.
what you have right now is on the books for certain zones in the city. People can build short-term rentals or convert existing units to short-term rentals. What this ordinance is doing, separate and apart from whether an accessory dwelling unit can be a short-term rental, is it expands the regulation on short-term rentals, and it also expands the zones within which they can be built. Then there's a separate question about, are you as a council wanting to support or prohibit accessory dwelling units specifically being used as short-term rentals? And the source of the department's concern and recommendation has been really focused on the parking and the road issues related to residential areas based on what we know will go into effect with the middle housing and the accessory dwelling unit bills that are now in place.
Okay, I think that I understand that, and the issue is, it would seem that in trying to, if we say an STR has to meet certain parking and other things over there, we would create them having to do that at the time they convert and get a license.
Potentially, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And so, you know, so I'm just moving to a different topic.
On that, yep, Mr. Anderson addressed, he had a question on your topic, so let him ask that question.
Just,
Go ahead, and then- Yeah,
I think we're getting a bit confused here using the word convert.
Yep.
Because you can convert uses, but you don't convert an ADU to something that is not an ADU. An ADU is a type of building. A single family residence is a type of building. A duplex is a type of building. Any one of them can be an ADU. ADU is the use. It's just like you have a commercial building and it can be a warehouse. It might be a restaurant. It might be something else, depending on what the zoning allows. So they're converting the use of the structure perhaps from a long-term rental, or my mother-in-law lives in my backyard, to a short-term rental, but it's still an ADU. It always will be an ADU.
as long as it meets the size criteria and all that stuff under the code, yeah. Because a house can't just be an ADU, it has to be 1,000 square feet or less, or whatever the code requirement is, yeah. Sizing goes up with the new house bill, doesn't it? Maybe we're all getting so confused, we should punt on this for another week or two. Mr. Brandstetter.
Okay, so my other question is, in the version of the ordinance that recommends prohibiting ADUs from being used as short-term rentals, that how does that apply to ADUs, existing ADUs that are already being used as short-term rentals? Would they have to stop?
What's being asked for in this set of regulations in both versions of the ordinance is that any pre-existing short-term rental, meaning an accessory dwelling unit or a part of a house, whatever it is, being used for something that is rented for 30 days or less. That's the basic definition of a short-term rental. Anybody that's doing that now, or any parcel that has that now, would have to seek the license and make sure that the city did the inspections going forward. So there's not an idea of a non-conforming or a grandfathered in short-term rental under these regs.
And would this issue become clearer a year from now when the comp plan relooks at issues around parking?
It may well, it may well 2 weeks from now, unfortunately, with timing, that's when the parking conversation will be in front of you. So we'll start that discussion.
So if we were to delete this particular amendment from either of the two proposed ordinance options, it could come back next year with better parking understanding and rules overall in the comp plan?
If what you're asking, Councilmember Brandstetter, is if we would just removed Amendment 12 altogether out of the package, is that what you mean?
That's right. If we adopted one of these two ordinances, but without Amendment 12, and approve the other 11 amendments, and then expecting that in next year's similar package, informed by what we've done about parking in the 2024 comp plan process, we would be able to do this.
You certainly could do that as a council. The only caveat I would throw out is that, as you see, there's the increased number of units being built for a year. So however many would come online for the next year would be non-conforming, if you will, at the time that the council adopted something.
Okay, and so in that vein, if a motion was made to delete Amendment 12, are you saying that there's really no difference between the two?
Other than that amendment, they are identical. So either one of the ordinances without Amendment 12, they're the same.
Thank you.
Mr. Lorissella.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Spear. I had just two questions. First, and I asked this, I think, last week. Can you help us differentiate between a second primary residence on a lot and an ADU?
It's very, very muddy now
Okay.
with these new bills that have been passed. Once upon a time, you would have a larger house or just a single house on a lot, and then it would be the mother-in-law apartment or the garage or something in the basement, something in the attic. And so the primary residence was this large structure, and you had a much smaller accessory dwelling unit. Then we got to the point where we have detached accessory dwelling units, right? So maybe you think a tiny house next to this larger house on the lot. We're now in this new world with what the state legislature has done this year, where essentially 1,000 square feet can be the primary residence. Depending on zoning, it can be the accessory dwelling unit as well. If you've got multiple units that are considered, quote, middle housing, which is up to a sixplex on a lot, you can have an accessory dwelling unit to that. So the idea that one's bigger than the other, or it's much muddier than it used to be, unfortunately.
Okay. Do we have regulations within the Lakewood Municipal Code for a maximum size of an accessory dwelling unit?
There is, yes, I don't have it in the top of my head, but we do have accessory dwelling unit code requirements, yes.
Okay. And then the last question I had was, do we anticipate parking issues for long-term rentals of ADUs as well? And how do we differentiate between that impact between short-term rentals and long-term rentals?
Sure. Based on the experience of other jurisdictions, based on recommendations that have come from national studies and the State Department of Commerce and MRSC, it seems that parking, trash, noise are all experienced more intensely with a short-term rental than a long-term rental. You just have a higher turnover of people coming and going. You have less of an investment in the neighborhood if they're just coming for a vacation and then they leave, as opposed to the long-term rental where they are there and they're invested. That's where they actually live. So, and there's also, in some cases, depending on whether your landlord is nearby or not, the effect that it has on the long-term rental market to have a number of short-term rentals in your area. So the short-term rental is seen through experience and best practice as something that can affect a neighborhood more negatively than the long-term rentals can.
Specifically for parking?
It includes parking, yes, because it looks like more people bring two cars to a short-term rental than not. So it's not just one person living there, one car.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And I do think our current ADU code, excuse me, requires parking on site.
Yes.
As I recall.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Boki, your hand is raised.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Spear, a couple items. Thank you for getting the information on enforcement and how enforcement might look and some of the challenges in that. Given the items that the staff put together on that, how long would it take for the city of Lakewood to put together what you would feel to be an adequate enforcement scheme, meaning business licensing and regulations, and I would include the imposition of the LTAC?
That would all happen relatively quickly. The adoption of a new type of permit in the city's department could happen before the new year. The idea of now requiring business licenses of all short-term rental operators would happen with an announcement, and then they have to comply with state and city requirements for business licensing. The issue is going to be more on the code enforcement side over time, where once you have presumably a tracking software program, for instance, that says this is the number of units, where they're located in your city, and then you're able to verify that against your business licenses, for instance, then you know when you've got a quote legal or illegal short-term rental in your city. And then the question becomes, what are the staff resources and other resources needed to then start to try to enforce the city's code? So getting the paperwork, getting the online business licensing and that sort of thing done relatively quickly within 6 months. But the question of code enforcement resources is different.
Yeah, hence the need for the higher business license amount, correct? Is that
Yeah, that's part of it.
why the cities are, or whoever's imposing these are asking for it based on revenue rather than on just the $60? Because that wouldn't because it's you're trying to cover so many of these.
Correct.
Could you, in a nutshell, and really quickly, and I apologize because I've missed some meetings, explain staff's reasoning behind the proposal to ban the ADUs
As short-term rentals.
as short-term rentals?
As short-term rentals, yes. It really is at its core what you see on pages 122. And there was information provided at the public hearing and at the original study session several weeks ago, where the staff is anticipating over time, you're going to have additional accessory dwelling units being built. And in the case of new state law that says you have to allow City of Lakewood 2 or either 4 of those per residential lot in the R1 through the R4 zones, over time, the city is going to start to experience increasing pressure on the roads in those residential areas, as well as the parking availability. There's a number of streets within the city's R1 through R4 zones, which are not wide enough to allow on-street parking as they are designed. They would have to maybe be restriped and maybe not sidewalks on both sides if you weren't actually trying to acquire new right-of-way to widen streets in order to allow that 60-foot at least right-of-way that would be needed for parking on one side. So the department was trying to avoid the setup of the city to start to see, depending on how fast it happens, it might be 5 years, it might be 10 years, but we know come the implementation of 1337, that's the bill that says ADUs happen in this number of units per lot. And the interest that we have heard from people that have contacted the city since those bills were adopted by the state, that you're going to end up with people coming to the council at some point to say, my neighborhood, I can't get through the streets anymore. People are parking on the street, or there's somebody that's got 15 cars at their house because there's a party at a short-term rental, and how are we supposed to get around our neighborhood? Those are the sorts of things that the department was concerned about.
And Tiffany, can you help me with the map on page, it looks like 122 of my packet. And thank you for putting this together. There's TripAdvisor owned, Priceline owned, Expedia owned. When you put those, are you indicating those are actually owned by the company?
Those are advertised through those companies. They are not owned by those companies.
Oh, okay. Okay. I just wanted to clear that up. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Sure.
I had a question on, before we leave it, amendment number 11 on the childcare facilities.
Sure.
Oh, that is page 208 I'm looking at of the packet.
Okay.
So one of the questions raised in public comment tonight was a concern about this proposed amendment allowing daycare facilities in all zones. And as I read the chart on page 208, daycare centers in existing and new schools would be allowed only in the multifamily zones and some of the commercial and TOC and CBD zones, daycare centers in existing churches, to the extent those churches existed in R1 through R4 zones would be permitted, but not in residential houses. I don't see that, right?
Correct. What you may want to look down to, Mr. Mayor, is where it says daycare center independent. That's where you got kind of the standalone business.
Got it.
And there you'll see that R1 through R4, MR1, MR2, and MF1, all of those zones, they're not allowed at all, not even conditionally. They are expanded to be a permitted use within MF3, the arterial residential commercial, neighborhood commercial 1, 2, and then some of the other commercial zones as well.
Where you might find multiple families, so to speak, that would have daycare needs. Okay. Mr. Anderson.
Well, we don't have much in the way of Green Acre development. The concept that I have seen work extremely well in an environment where it's not the 1950s, families have 2 working people. In most cases, is that the development is actually built around a daycare center and a school. Not necessarily conjoined, but the daycare center is integrated into the neighborhood just like the school is, so that people don't have to travel and their children can walk. And it's the way developments are done in Sweden, for example. But I think we need to allow for that possibility, even if it's a conditional use permit. But that could be left for future discussion if someone wants to integrate a housing project with daycare. I know when if you drive out to the newer areas of housing at JBLM, you'll find the childcare centers dispersed to be by housing, not to be next to the fast food and the gas station. So
I think this would allow it in MR1, 2, MF1, 2, and 3 though, right? That concept?
The concept of a family daycare, which is up to 12 kids and inside someone's home, is allowed throughout all of the residential areas. What Mayor, you and I were just talking about in the upper part of that table on page 208, those are the commercial ones, which are 13 or more children.
I'm just suggesting that when we can go forward, I don't object to that, but it should be something that's considered as to adding it as a conditional use in other zones so that a residential development or redevelopment could incorporate a daycare center for the convenience of the people who are living there. Not that it had to be. So you aren't going to have a lot of 13 children in home care centers.
Right.
You're going to have a half dozen maybe.
Any further questions on that while we're there? Okay, so what we currently have are options. You've got ordinance 793, which, as Ms. Spear indicated, is the version where the proposed amendments 1 through 11 are the same. They differ in proposed amendment number 12, in that ordinance proposed 793 does not allow ADUs to be used as short-term rentals, whereas 794 does, with conditions.
Correct.
Okay. Any further questions or clarifications? If not, do I have a motion to adopt either ordinance? Mr. Brandstetter.
I move adoption of ordinance 794.
Been moved by Mr. Brandstetter that we adopt ordinance 794, seconded by Councilmember Laura Sella. Mr. Brandstetter, did you want to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The two options are identical, and I do think that our discussion shows that there's some uncertainty about what the rules should be about short-term rentals that were some period of time away from really having a good handle and of implementing our regulations regarding short-term rentals, that we're going to we have some dollars in the budget to facilitate getting to that point. And so that being the case, at this point, I would move to amend the ordinance by deleting Amendment 12.
Second the amendment.
It's been moved by Councilmember Branstetter, seconded by Councilmember Anderson, that we delete from consideration proposed amendment 12 to ordinance number 794. Any further discussion on that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Boki.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I need some help to catch up on this now. So 794 is the Planning Commission recommendations, but you're taking out 12. So what is the practical impact of taking out amendment 12?
Let me see if I can articulate it, and Ms. Spear will correct me. The practical impact with regard to proposed amendments 1 through 11 is nil. There's no impact. So those are as they stand. With regard to the ADU question that we've discussed in proposed amendment 12, that simply would live to fight another day. It would not be regulated or allowed by this amendment. But in practicality, it would be my understanding that any existing short-term rentals in the city, whether in single-family homes or in current ADUs, would proceed as is without regulation.
It's with current regulation. There are a few things on the books, but it's nothing like what you see here, correct?
Okay, does that help, Mr. Boki?
It does, but I'm kind of looking for what's our path forward then.
Well, I can turn to Mr. Branstetter, who made the motion. So Mr. Branstetter, what is the path forward for Mr. Boki?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Mr. Bogi, to your question, I think the path forward is to establish the regulatory framework.
Meaning?
For short-term rentals. There are a whole group of proposals that are in our packet today from staff about what they might do to create that. And the timeline is that, given that we've provided some 2024 funding for the software necessary to work to do that, that a year from now, we would be informed by a firm regulatory piece that would allow us to sort of take a look at whether we want to allow ADUs to be used as short-term rentals under a new regulatory format that could include provisions regarding parking and other things to be able to go and do that right now we can't see. And I'd rather to do that. So essentially the equities between the two options of the ordinances are what I'm looking to get moved forward and approved, and do the work that is intended to be done anyway regarding a regulatory structure for short-term rentals. And we'll be able to come back in a year with the amendments and have I think be able to make a decision with a much clearer vision.
Okay. Yeah, as long as we're moving towards a regulatory structure of some sort, I can handle that.
As opposed to an outright ban, is that what I hear you say?
Yeah, I'm not, I think a ban brings on its own set, but I will say this. This is just another one of those things that makes, now it's short-term rentals. It's been rentals of all sorts. We've tried it with our rental safety program to at least ameliorate some of the negative impacts of that. But it's always something, right? And I think I do think this is something we're going to have to deal with. We're going to have to watch very carefully, because as that number rises, and if it continues to rise at the rate it's been rising, we're going to be challenged as a city council to really take this on. Does this really fit into it? And I think short-term rentals are just another idea that also makes it hard that the city's, which is the city of Lakewood's biggest problem, trying to get our housing mix right and trying to create a housing mix that works for neighborhoods, that works for the community, and not just works for investors. And I understand investors need to make money, and it's important that people invest in our community. But I just feel like reading through this material and the growth of these things, and the number of organizations, large organizations that are involved in these, that this is just another complication on our way to try to fix our housing problem, which is one of the reasons that the city of Lakewood became a city in the first place. And I support this. I'm going to vote yes, but I believe that we should try to put it together, a strict regulatory structure. And if that doesn't work, we need to be prepared to go further, because I just think forces continue to align themselves against trying to fix our housing issues in our city.
Very good. I also think, based upon what I heard at the Wednesday night meeting, there was, for any number of reasons, perhaps a lot of confusion about what was or what wasn't on the table for discussion. So giving this issue some time might provide even better public comment and perhaps bring out a better regulatory scheme for us to consider. So if that's helpful, Mr. Anderson.
One final comment. I think we may find that, nationally, the Airbnb market is saturated. Revenues are down last year, not for some of the companies, but overall for the industry. We may find that we get what we need by incentivizing, or at least not disincentivizing, people from creating a unit with contemplating using it as an Airbnb, finding out that it's a pain to run it and that it isn't occupied as much as they think, especially if they're $90 unit in Springbrook. You're not going to go vacation there. It's not like you're on a lake or you're in a snow resort. And that the alternative to that is converting its use to a long-term rental. So you actually get housing units by allowing the market to pursue either one of those as an option, makes it more of an incentive to build. And then the market, like other markets that change, kind of levels itself out. So I'm not so concerned that we are going to have a moving target, as regulation is necessary and it's a problem and it's going to cost some money. But I don't think it's a moving target, that we're not going to have to deal with units that double in quantity. And that we may, after all, at the end of the day, actually create more middle market housing.
Mr. Lauricella.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm okay with deferring answers until we have more public feedback and more data at hand. But my opinion as it is now, from my experience in short-term rentals, and whenever we go on vacation, we typically stay in those because it's a way to give back to those families who are often renting them out to raise money for themselves. I think there's a need for additional short-term rental opportunities in Lakewood because it's appealing to JBLM families who are here temporarily until they can get established into a long-term place. I think there's a need there. And I found that in my research, the industry has been somewhat self-regulating in that if a place is trashed and is a mess in the surrounding community, it gets bad reviews and they pull it off these websites that allow them to market them. So additionally, I liked Councilmember Anderson's proposal or thought about, as we license things as a short-term rental, maybe that's where we would require things like parking, independent of whether it's an ADU or not, because that's limited in our ability to do that. But tying it to the short-term rental piece of it, I think is a good approach. So,
Great.
thank you.
Well, very good. I'll just say my two cents on this piece and then be done, and we'll call for the vote. But I think I signaled my thoughts the last time we met about an outright ban of ADUs used as short-term rentals, again, because I think it's a use type that there is some value for either families visiting JBLM for 3 or 4 nights or 5 nights or 10 nights, something under 30. You know, personally, when I visit my kids at college, we get together as parents and we rent out an Airbnb because we like being together, and it's usually in a residential neighborhood. It's not an ADU. Typically, it's a single family home, but it is a housing type that has value to a lot of people, not just economic to those who are owning and running them, but to those of us who like to travel for short term in jurisdictions or areas that, you know, it's not as feasible or economical, frankly, to have 2 or 3 families in hotel rooms. It's better to just rent a house. You know, we did it for my kid's wedding in Tennessee. We do it in the college towns, those kinds of things. But that said, neighborhoods deserve and neighbors deserve a regulatory scheme that works so that the neighbors aren't disrupted unduly in their own quiet enjoyment of their homes. So I completely get it. All right, so what is currently on the table is the amendment to ordinance 794 to delete from consideration proposed amendment 12 on this topic. So in the absence of any further discussion, all those in favor of the proposed amendment, which deletes amendment 12 from proposed ordinance 794, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? The amendment has passed. We now turn to ordinance 794 as amended, which has removed proposed amendment 12. Any further discussion? All those in favor of ordinance 794 as amended, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? 794 as amended has been adopted, and I think we've got plenty of good talking points that gives you good direction. I hope, Ms. Spear.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, Madam Clerk. Ordinance 796.
Ordinance number 796 relating to ad valorem property taxes, establishing the amount to be raised in 2024 by taxation on the assessed valuation of the property of the city and setting the property tax levy rate for 2024.
Good
Very
evening.
good. Thank you, Ms. Kraus.
This item was presented to the City Council on October 2nd. A public hearing was held on November 6th, and tonight is the adoption or approval of the property tax. Per state law, the city is authorized to increase the property tax annually up to 1%, the lesser 1% or implicit price deflator. The IPD, the implicit price deflator, is 3.67%. This means the city can take the full 1% levy increase in 2024 without the city council adopting a declaration of substantial need. The city has enacted the 1% increase since 2006. The 2024 proposed property tax levy totals $7,931,957 based on the 1% limit factor. The 2024 1% increase equates to $77,696, and the cumulative effect of not taking the increase in 2024 over the 6-year period is approximately $478,000. So based on the average home value, the proposed tax levy of 0.782 is slightly less than the 2023 levy rate of 0.710. And that concludes my presentation.
Very good. Any questions of Ms. Kraus? If not, do I have a motion to adopt ordinance 796?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
It's been moved by Deputy Mayor Moss, seconded by Councilmember Brandstetter that we adopt ordinance 796. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ordinance 796 has been adopted. We now turn to resolutions. Resolution 2023-12, Madam Clerk.
Resolution number 2023-12, adopting the 2024 fee schedule.
Again, for this, we have our Deputy City Manager, Ms. Kraus.
So as part of the budget adjustment review at the end of the year, we also include the 2024 fee schedule amendments for City Council consideration. This item was presented by our Parks Director, Mary Dodsworth, on November 13th, and tonight we're here for the City Council consideration and adoption. The only change is in Section G for the Parks and Recreation programs, which our Parks Director, Mary Dodsworth, went into detail at the study session. If there are additional questions, we have her here this evening.
Very good. Any questions of Ms. Kraus or Ms. Dodsworth on the proposed adoption of the 2024 fee schedule? If not, do I have a motion to adopt resolution 2023-12?
Second.
Mr. Brandstetter has moved adoption, seconded by Councilmember Anderson. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of resolution 2023-12 as presented, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Fee schedule in resolution 2023 has been adopted. Thank you very much. Unfinished business, Mr. Caulfield, anything?
There's none this evening, Mayor.
Very good. Any new items of business?
None this evening, Mayor.
So you have the floor with your reports by the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Council. I'd like to call upon our Parks, Recreation, and Community Services Director, Mary Dodsworth, to give you an update on the Tensler Library log relocation project. As you know, we have agreed, the city has agreed in conjunction with the Pierce County Library System to take ownership of that city artifact, if you will. And Ms. Dodsworth is to present you with some options and a recommendation on where it can be moved to for the best enjoyment of all in our community. So with that, Ms. Dodsworth.
Thank you, Mayor Wellen and city council members. So the city has a great big log that's located in front of the library. I provided a bit of history, and it's pretty fantastic that we have this monument, this resource in our community. It's been there for quite some time. And I know that there's been some challenges with the library and locations and things, but throughout the process, people kept saying, what's going to happen to the log? They care about the log. They have nostalgia about the log. So the city agreed to take over the log and find someplace great to store it and keep it. Well, it's big. It's quite large. It weighs almost 10 tons. And so we really have to do some thoughtful planning in order to figure out where it could go. So we did a lot of brainstorming on that and came up with 3 potential options, provided some pros and cons to council regarding those options. I'd be happy to chat with you about those or answer any questions. But in the long run, we really looked at the pros for Fort Steilacoom Park seem to outweigh the other locations based on the fact that this is needing to happen quite quickly. You know, the library is intending on demolishing the structure, and they really can't do that with the log there. So they're hoping to move it in the first quarter, and the fact that that's ticking up quite quickly, and we've got a couple holidays in, there's a lot of tasks that have to occur. First of all, you can't move a 10-ton log tomorrow, right? There needs to be really thoughtful planning on just getting it from one location to another. And wherever we decide to put it, we have to make sure that it's going to be able to stand or lay down, I guess, if that's how you want it, but we think standing, similar to how it is now. It has to be engineered. The footings have to, support it. It has to be safe if it's going to be in a public space, and we want to protect it so that it's going to be there for future generations. We've got some great, we've had some great conversations with the Nisqually tribe on how we can create it as part of the Nisqually Loop Trail. So not only does it have American history located on it on those little plaques, but we could also include Nisqually history during those timeframes. So that's kind of exciting. Could be one of the many exhibits that we have along that Nisqually Loop Trail. So we're recommending Fort Steilacoom Park as the location, and we really just want to get concurrence from council, or if there's any major concerns that you have, because there's so many elements that need to be happening in order to prepare for that move. Do you have any questions?
Well, I have plenty, but I'll open it up. you know, for the proposed price tag, I know it's an estimate, $150,000.
Dollars.
Yeah, not pesos. We've struggled on the public art budget in dollar amounts in that range, and this is a hit. So we've got, I hope, the wherewithal to do it. The other question I had was, as part of that budget, what's the proposed structure to cover it, or some sort of like a picnic shelter sort of type thing that would keep the rain off of it?
Right, yeah, so the library will cover the full cost of moving it, and
Right.
that means getting it out of the current location, getting it on a crane, getting it on a truck, getting it to the park.
Mhm.
What the cost for 150,000 is, the engineering and
Mhm.
permitting that needs to be required for a thing of that
The
structure of that
footings,
size.
concrete.
We
Yeah.
are considering something very similar to a picnic shelter, so it's in line with the structures at the park, a prefab structure, probably a 16 by 20. And as you, on the staff report, page 261, or pardon me, your agenda bill
Mhm.
261, you can see a drawing of the original structure.
Right.
A picnic shelter looks very much like that.
Mhm.
It won't have a glass enclosure as it has now. We're looking at something that's for mesh or like a chain link fence, but not quite chain link fencey,
Yeah.
but something that's, well, you can breathe and see through it
Yeah.
and have that experience of it, but not be able to touch it, pick it, throw
Yeah.
something at it,
Painted. Yeah.
paint it. We are talking about the, checking into, it almost feels like they have some kind of like we would use a graffiti sealant over it. It could just be age, so that you could, if someone was to throw something through
Yeah.
it or spray something through it, we would be able to, you know, do what we do when things like that happen. So, and protect it as best we can.
I would advocate, it's up to the council and budget, but some sort of plexiglass or glass so people could actually see it better. And there are nice metal cleats you can do. I've seen it where they've, you know, we're looking at structures like this for Pierce Transit's shelters, those kinds of things where you can provide some visible connectivity. It doesn't look too iron mesh.
Well, we'll do our best to come up with options for
Yeah.
consideration. That type of thing is much more expensive and
I'm
it's
sure.
heavier.
Yeah.
And glass at Sound Transit places as well as in parks is not necessarily a good feature. Maybe there's a good plexiglass, doesn't hold up well
Something,
outside
yeah.
the weather.
Mhm.
But we'll consider some options, and of course, we'll keep council briefed on that, on what can be purchased and created. Now,
Mhm.
to get a shelter kit and installed in this short period of time, you know, it's going to be a challenge. So we're going to do our best to get it put together, but it'll be something long lasting. I mean, it's going to be there for quite some time. So, and if for some reason the log breaks into 5,000 pieces when they go to move it, which we don't know what's going to happen, it's been sitting there for quite some time, then we'll have a giant puzzle day at the park. Everybody will get their piece of the puzzle. We'll bring it back every year, and we'll write on the back as to, you know, the dates and times and the families that own them. It'll be something that gets passed on for generations. But anyway, we're working with the library right now and doing our best to get prepared for this
Got it.
momentous
Is there
move.
any
If
sort
council
of
is,
atmospheric sort of stuff, considerations to avoid deterioration? I mean, that's way beyond me, but
there are logs like this in lots of
places.
national parks.
Yeah.
I don't think state parks, but there are logs in the area that are just out there and exposed. So it's not a unique to our
Got it.
area.
Okay.
But we also want to be realistic to the location, the size, and to put a glass box out in the park. I think that's a bit of a challenge, but we'll do our best.
Mr. Anderson.
Have you consulted anybody who's done this, anything similar before? You know, I've seen something like this where it was banded to move.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
There's got to be somebody somewhere that's
rolled a log.
The log mover.
Yeah. There's a company called, I think it's called DBX. Is it on here? EXB. Their exhibit company. The log right now is banded actually twice. So there are bands around it this way. The original ones, I think, are almost like a whiskey barrel band. That's the type of metal around it. But then there are what we heard from the engineer that's working with us on this, along with James Guerrero, to assess it and figure it out. It used to be on facing Gravely Lake Drive. And then when they remodeled the library, they actually, I guess, moved it again and put it where it is now in its
So I
glass
rolled it.
case.
Yeah.
But there, so besides the whiskey barrel band that's around it, there are also 3, I think, metal cables that
Mhm.
are holding it
Mhm.
together. There is a bit of a gap between what the bark would be, which is significant,
Mhm.
and the log itself. So
Who knows?
yes, so it's banded now. I'm sure it's wrapped in plastic. I don't know if you've been there lately, but they
Mhm.
have it completely wrapped in plastic. I think they did that when they started shutting the library down. So it would probably be moved in that configuration. I don't know that, we're gonna have to work on the logistics of when it needs to be moved and when you can get the structure there and how that's gonna all happen. But we've got great minds working on it.
Mr. Lorisella.
See if I can figure out the microphone. Hi. I've done some amateur woodworking, and there's one way that logs can be preserved is by encasing them in epoxy.
Mhm.
Has that been something that we considered or may consider as a way to make it more solid and less likely to fall apart when we go to move it?
We've considered an epoxy type solvent or material. And so we're really right now just gathering a lot of information to see what would work. We like that idea because it would seal it.
Mhm.
It's something that you could technically pressure wash or remove if somebody was to put something on there or, so there are good materials to be used. So we're considering those kinds of things to protect it. If we're going to have this great resource out there, we, like all of our buildings, we want to protect them. So from themselves, people, fire.
Too many puns come to mind, so I will leave it alone. But yeah, don't want to get a jam with the log, but Mr. Anderson.
Do we know where the log came from originally?
You mean the
It's just
forest?
Where it was
This area, I
harvested?
think.
I
was it really?
don't,
Packwood.
there's a great website that has a lot more detail and
Packwood, apparently.
it's in Washington. I can find that out for you. I can't remember, but I do remember finding out where it took, I think 3 days to be actually cut through enough to fall, knock over.
Mhm.
And, but I can find that out for you and I'll get that for you. I don't have it on my summary, but I
Mr.
remember.
Lorisella
Curious.
says
And-
Packwood.
It was located Tensler, he owned the Tacoma Door Company and that's where it was for years. And I guess they made baseball bats and chairs and other things out of a portion of it as well.
Yeah, if I recall correctly from the website, it was felled in Packwood and then transported. to-
Packwood, yes. That's what I-
Transported to Tacoma where it was displayed by the Tensler family.
And when you put the Nisqually dates on, don't believe Willie Frank. Joe Cushman wasn't there at the Treaty of Medicine Creek.
Thank you, Ms. Dodsworth. We appreciate it.
So is there consensus for Fort Stolken Park? That's really what we wanted to get tonight so we can move
Yeah,
forward.
I
Okay,
think that sounds great.
great. Thank you
It'd be
very
kind
much.
of cool to integrate with the H barn maybe, but if on the trail system, it'd be
It
wonderful.
wouldn't, yeah.
I saw there were 2 options in Fort Stoliken Park on the display, right? There are 2.
Yeah, so we're considering where the right spot would be, that's accessible, that's viewable, that a train or a crane and a truck can get to. It's kind of on like where the plaza restroom is now, right? Kind of between that and the cemetery. We don't want to create a sight distance issue, or not a sight distance, a sight issue where you are driving in and you can't see behind it. That's a problem. So the location that's on the end of the parking lot as you're going to Wahop Lake, there's a perfect spot there that would be easy. It wouldn't create a sight distance for problematic activities afterwards. Also, the area that's that plaza area next to the cemetery, when we did talk to the Nisquallies on one of the many tours that we had, they don't like certain things to be too close to cemeteries. That's kind of a cultural thing. So we're kind of looking at not having it in that location, just so that we're respecting their cultural heritage requests as well.
Great.
But in that
Anything
general
else?
area.
Yeah, so Ms. Wadwitz, I appreciate the presentation and the fact that it's worked through to where there are options to focus on to be able to go and do that. I appreciate that the plan is to move it once.
Yeah.
To do that. I'm going to say that I was surprised by the $150,000 estimate. That seems low. to be
Oh.
able to do a job to preserve this for a long time, to be able to go and do that. So I'd say that as you look at options, look for if there are some things that are perhaps more expensive, but that are going to be more long-term viable, I'd look to do that. I think that there is affection for this log in the community, that it is something that will draw attention to people, that it's something that is very tangible, that can help achieve our goal of trying to connect people with history. And so I think it's something, a project well worthwhile, and as such worthwhile to do well with, and rather than to try to do it within a restrained budget.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Caulfield, anything else? Okay.
Just one other update, Mayor and Council. That is this Wednesday at noon, we'll be having the reopening of Washington Boulevard. A ribbon cutting ceremony, and ceremony itself will be held at the new roundabout at the intersection of Lake City Boulevard and Washington, which is where the firehouse is. So there'll be parking on the firehouse property as well as around the corner at there's a church there as well for overflow parking. So again, a little ceremony, and Mayor will have some talking points for you in terms of recognizing everybody who was involved in this great project. Also, just want to point out, as far as we know, this is the largest project that the city has, the largest road project that the city has taken on since incorporation. It's about a $23+ million project when you take into effect what we call the JBLM North Access Phase 1 and Phase 2 projects, of which this is Phase 2. So with that, that's my report this evening. Thank you. Say again. Noon, that's correct. Yep, noon, council member. And then once that's done, the road will officially open. There's still lots of work to be done out there by the contractor, but the road itself is open.
Very good. Any other questions, Mr. Caulfield? I had a quick question for you related to the library from the public comment we heard tonight. I haven't heard a thing about any application for apartment projects on the Tinsler Library site. I don't know where that was coming from.
Yeah, no, that's correct.
Known
Mayor.
for it, but
Yeah, there hasn't been. And again, the analysis that we did for the TIF was simply pointing out best available uses of a number of properties
Right.
within the central business district. But whether or not any of that will come to fruition is to be determined by the actual property owner. And right now, the Pierce County Library System has no interest in doing that. And matter of fact, their board is expected, hopefully sometime in 2024, if not sooner, expected to make a decision on where they want to locate
absolutely.
a new permanent library. And I do know, and you've heard them say this, that that's one of the potential locations. So, and it could be their preferred location, but again, that's for them to.
I
make
just
a-
wanted to
make a
clarify
decision
that
on.
because that was my understanding as well, that those were just possible projections of
That's correct.
potential usage that had never been a decision made as yet.
That is correct, Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. Now we'll turn to council comments. Mr. Loricella.
I think I covered everything in our other topics tonight, so I appreciate everyone's contributions and hope everyone has a safe and happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Mr. Brandstetter.
Well, I will say that I'm looking forward to the ribbon cutting on Washington Boulevard. And that's going to be a major milestone for both up for the city, our Public Works Department, but also for that neighborhood.
Absolutely. Mr. Boki.
Yeah, thanks. Nice to be back. I'm going to try to make the Washington Boulevard soiree because it's a very cool and it is been a very large project and it looks from what I've seen so far of it, looks great. So I'm looking forward to being there. I'm hoping I can make it.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, I think some of the confusion with respect to the potential future use of the site may have been a result of publishing a map that says we're going to grant multifamily tax exemptions to that site. So people fill in the blanks. Today, I had a meeting with the Garrison leadership at JBLM and two staff members from Congresswoman Strickland's office regarding the potential for freeing up some land on JBLM for outside the security perimeter for residential development, which could potentially add 100 homes to the county, or excuse me, 1,000 homes to the county's inventory. It's a long process. It's been done before. It took them 13 years in Wyoming, but there is a template. The Army hasn't done it. Since it's a joint base, they are interested, and one potential area is near the Veterans Golf Course that's got housing on three sides basically right now, but there are others. So they're going to identify sites. They're also going to go to the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Installations, Energy and Environment to request formal permission to study the EUL and its enhanced use lease. And there are a variety of development advantages to a private developer to developing on the site. So hopefully we can get the ball rolling and hopefully it will be less than the 10 years, which is the current record. I think that was for a different type of site in Grand Forks, but the Air Force has got it down. So they think they can use the Air Force regulations, but they have to get permission from the Secretary of the Army because the Army owns the dirt, to use the Air Force regulations, even though the MOU on the joint base says they can use the best practices of either. So at least it's, and Commanding General, not site specific, but the Commanding General is in favor of pursuing it. That always helps. So we'll keep apprised, and it should hopefully take some pressure off the housing market in Pierce County. Because they can do it with a Green Acre site. And I will be out of town on the next two meetings.
Very good. Deputy Mayor Moss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Unfortunately, I have 11:30 appointment tomorrow morning, so I won't make the grant ribbon cutting. But I just wanted to say happy Thanksgiving to everybody. That's it.
Well, thank you. Just a couple quick ones. Last Thursday, I attended a Lakewood United meeting. They're trying to reinvigorate Lakewood United, get some activity, figure out timing, location, speaker agenda, how to attract and cultivate a sense of civic engagement. Mr. Brandstetter was there as well. So they're very hopeful that they can get that back to a place where there's good dialogue of topical interest for residents in a good location that works. So more to follow on that. Tomorrow I am doing a ribbon cutting out in Puyallup for the Pierce Transit Runner Program that's going to be serving that community. Again, it's a call on demand van service that enhances the transportation options available to folks within the transportation regions within Pierce County. So that will be one of the first new opportunities for folks to try a runner in the Puyallup area. So more to follow on that. I think they're going to do similar work in Lakewood down the road. And then I'll see you on Wednesday for the North Access Improvement ribbon cutting. I drove the road this weekend and it looks really good. I went all the way from Gravelly Lake all the way down to Military Road. It's in great shape. There's a lot of landscaping yet to be done, but it's a beautiful project and it's really well done. There are a lot of folks who complain to me about Gravelly Lake that there weren't sufficient provisions made for bicycle riders, and this one has a dedicated bike lane in addition to nice sidewalks, so they're going to be happy to be able to go to North Fort or Stillicum on their bike on that particular roadway, so that's a good thing. And I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving, a safe one, and we'll see you after the holiday. At this time, we're going to recess into executive session for about 15 minutes pursuant to RCW 423110 sub 1 sub I to discuss with legal counsel representing the city any litigation or potential litigation. The city council will not take action following the executive session other than to adjourn this meeting. So at this point, we'll be in recess.